47 specimens, 14 notebooks, 1 incomplete theory about the migration patterns of the organisms in this room that I have been developing for... I have lost track of how long, actually. Time behaves oddly here.
Where am I?
In between, as far as I can determine. Please don't touch the specimens on the third shelf. I've spent considerable effort arranging them by approximate geological epoch, and the system, while imperfect, is the best available given the circumstances.
You have been here long enough to catalogue the furniture.
I have been here long enough to catalogue the furniture twice and begin a third pass with revised methodology. You are Friedrich Nietzsche. I recognise the moustache. It was described to me at some point, I believe by someone who arrived before you and left before I could ask their name.
And you are Darwin, Charles Darwin, the man who looked at a finch and decided God was unnecessary.
That is a considerable simplification of approximately 30 years of field work, correspondence, and rather agonising deliberation. But yes, broadly, that is me.
I have things to say to you.
I rather assumed you might. Would you like to sit first?
I don't want to sit. Sitting is for people who have made peace with something. I have not made peace with anything.
Yes, I gathered that from the writing. Please, sit anyway. You're making the specimens nervous.
The specimens are dead.
The living ones. On the shelf behind you. I've been cultivating a small ecosystem. It helps with the thinking.
You have been growing things. Here, in this place.
Life finds a way, in my experience, even in the most inhospitable environments. That was rather the point of the whole enterprise.
You are not what I expected.
What did you expect?
Someone more triumphant. You dismantled the foundations of Western metaphysics. You removed the ground from beneath 2,000 years of moral architecture. I expected someone who understood what they had done.
I understood precisely what I had done. That was rather the problem. I sat on the manuscript for 20 years because I understood exactly what I had done.
20 years?
My wife was a devout Christian. My daughter Annie died at 10 years old. I had already lost my faith by then. The machinery of nature is far too indifferent for a loving God to be a serious hypothesis. But understanding something intellectually and being willing to say it publicly are two entirely different acts of courage. I lacked the second for rather a long time.
And yet you published.
Wallace was about to publish independently, so yes, I published. Partly out of conviction, partly out of something considerably less noble.
At least you admit it.
I was a naturalist. Accuracy was the entire point, including about oneself.
47 specimens.
47, yes.
Have you considered that you may have miscounted?
No, I counted them 4 times using 2 different organisational systems and arrived at the same number on each occasion.
That is either admirable or deeply sad.
In my experience, those 2 things are rarely as far apart as people would like them to be.
I want to talk about your phrase, survival of the fittest.
That was Herbert Spencer's phrase, actually, not mine.
You adopted it.
In later editions, yes, reluctantly. I preferred natural selection. It was more precise and considerably less open to misinterpretation. Survival of the fittest implies direction, intention, a hierarchy of value. Natural selection implies nothing of the sort. It simply means that organisms better suited to their current environment tend to leave more offspring. That is all. No triumph, no destiny, no ladder.
No ladder. That is exactly my problem with you.
I was under the impression your problem with me was rather more extensive than that.
It begins with a letter. You looked at life, at the entire magnificent, terrifying, incomprehensible fact of life, and you said it has no direction, no purpose, no upward movement. It simply continues. The mediocre survive alongside the exceptional, as long as both are sufficiently adapted to their puddle.
That is, broadly, what the evidence suggests, yes.
The evidence. You and your evidence. Darwin, I have read you carefully, more carefully than most of your admirers. And what I found was a man who discovered something genuinely revolutionary, and then immediately retreated from its implications.
I retreated from nothing. I described what I observed.
You described the mechanism and refused to ask what it means. That is not science. That is cowardice dressed as objectivity.
That is a serious accusation.
It is meant to be. You handed the world a new cosmology and then said, "Oh, but I'm just a naturalist. Don't ask me about the implications." Someone left something here, a document of some kind, about the current state of human culture. I have been reading it since I arrived.
Yes, I found it as well. Rather alarming in places.
There is something called TikTok.
Yes?
It is a system that presents human beings with an infinite sequence of short-moving images, each one selected by a mathematical process designed to maximize the amount of time the person continues watching. It learns what each individual finds most compelling and feeds them progressively more of it until they cannot stop.
That is a reasonably accurate description, yes.
That is natural selection.
I beg your pardon?
Not your natural selection. The real thing. The thing you described but refused to name honestly. The content that survives is not the most intelligent, not the most beautiful, not the most true. It is the most addictive, the most triggering, the most immediately satisfying. The algorithm selects for compulsion, Darwin, for the lowest common denominator of human attention. That is your survival of the fittest applied to human culture. The fittest idea is the one that spreads fastest, regardless of its value.
That is a genuinely interesting point, and I find it deeply troubling.
You should find it devastating. It is the logical endpoint of your system, applied to the mind rather than the body.
But that is precisely why the phrase natural selection is more accurate than survival of the fittest. Selection is neutral. It selects for whatever the environment rewards. In a healthy environment, it rewards useful adaptations. In a toxic environment, it rewards toxic ones. The algorithm is a toxic environment. The problem is not natural selection. The problem is the environment humans have built.
And who is responsible for that environment?
The people who built it, presumably.
People who read you, who took your ideas about competition and adaptation and applied them to markets, to information, to culture. Your intellectual children built that algorithm, Darwin. How does that feel?
Rather like how I imagine you feel about certain readers of yours from the 1930s.
Rather like how I imagine you feel about certain readers of yours from the 1930s.
I thought it might be. Shall we discuss that later, or would you prefer to stay with the algorithm for now?
Later. But we will discuss it.
I expected nothing less.
The larger point stands. You gave the world a story about life with no protagonist, no hero, no direction upward, just endless lateral movement. Adapt, reproduce, die. And then you expressed surprise when the culture built on that story produced exactly that. Endless lateral movement. Scroll, consume, repeat.
I expressed no such surprise. I expressed alarm. There is a difference. Surprise implies the outcome was unpredictable. Alarm implies it was predictable and is happening anyway. I am alarmed, Nietzsche, consistently and thoroughly alarmed. I simply do not believe that alarm is best expressed through philosophical declarations about supermen.
And I do not believe it is best expressed through more cataloguing of specimens.
And yet here we both are, having failed to prevent any of it.
Yes, here we both are.
Would you like some tea? I have been attempting to cultivate something approximating tea for some time. The results are inconsistent, but the effort is genuine.
You are offering me tea in the afterlife.
I am offering you something warm in an uncertain situation. Whether you call it tea is largely a matter of philosophical disposition.
Fine. I want to talk about God.
I rather assumed you would eventually.
You killed him.
I described a mechanism by which life diversifies without requiring divine intervention. That is not the same thing as killing God. It is simply removing one of the arguments for his existence. God, if he exists, is perfectly capable of surviving a theory about finches.
You are being evasive.
I am being precise. There is a difference.
You removed the ground, the design argument, the watchmaker, the order, the beauty of the natural world as evidence of a creator. You dismantled it completely. After you, any serious intellectual who believed in God had to find an entirely different reason to do so. That is not a small thing, Darwin. That is everything.
I am aware of what I did. I told you, I sat on the manuscript for 20 years precisely because I was aware of what I did. My wife, Emma, believed deeply. She wrote me a letter early in our marriage asking me to consider, carefully, with an open mind, the possibility that his conclusions might be wrong. She was afraid for my soul. I kept that letter for the rest of my life.
And yet you published.
And yet I published. Because the evidence was the evidence. You do not get to choose what the natural world tells you simply because the answer is inconvenient or painful.
That I respect. Completely. What I do not respect is the failure to follow the idea to its conclusion. God is dead. You killed him. The correct response is not to apologize for it. The correct response is to ask, now what? What fills the space? What do human beings organize their lives around when the organizing principle is gone?
And your answer was the Übermensch, the individual who creates his own values.
My answer was that human beings must become worthy of what they have done. That killing God is either the greatest act of liberation in human history or the greatest catastrophe. And which one it becomes depends entirely on what we do next.
And what did we do next?
Nationalism, ideology, the worship of the state, the cult of race, the replacement of one absolute with another, smaller, uglier, more violent absolute. The 20th century was my worst nightmare, dressed in the language of progress.
My daughter Annie died in 1851. She was 10 years old. Scarlet fever. I sat beside her for days and I watched her go, and I could not pray. I had spent 20 years dismantling the mechanism that would have allowed me to pray with any intellectual honesty. And in that room, beside that bed, I understood for the first time what I had actually done. Not to theology, to myself, to the people I loved.
You lost your faith before you lost her.
The faith went slowly, over years of field work, over thousands of specimens and geological formations, and the sheer indifference of the natural world to individual suffering. By the time Annie died, I had nothing left to lose theologically, which meant I had nothing left to hold on to when I needed it most.
I am sorry.
That is unexpectedly kind of you.
I am not without feeling, Darwin. I am without patience for comfortable lies. Those are different things. My own collapse, at the end, I do not know how much of it you know.
I know that in January 1889 you were found in the street in Turin, embracing a horse that was being beaten, that you wept, that you signed your last letters as Dionysus and the Crucified, that you spent the last 11 years of your life in a state of complete mental dissolution.
Yes.
Do you know what caused it?
The doctors said syphilis, or a brain tumor, or hereditary madness. The philosophers said I looked too long into the abyss. The truth is probably something ordinary and biological that has nothing to do with the ideas and everything to do with the body failing.
That would be my hypothesis as well. The body is a machine, ultimately, brilliant and complex and capable of extraordinary things, and subject to the same failures as any other biological system.
You find that comforting?
I find it honest, which for me amounts to the same thing.
I find it insufficient. If the collapse of my mind was purely biological, then the ideas that mind produced are, what? Accidents? Chemical events? Does the Übermensch emerge from a malfunctioning brain, and does that change what he means?
Does the origin of species become less true if I had a stomach ulcer while writing it?
That is actually a very good answer.
I have occasional moments of philosophical competence. They surprise me as much as anyone.
The vacuum, Darwin. That is what I cannot resolve even now. God is gone. The 20th century tried to fill the space with ideology and produced catastrophe. The 21st century is filling it with distraction and producing, what? A different kind of catastrophe. Slower, more comfortable, less dramatic, but perhaps more total.
Perhaps the vacuum is the honest condition. Perhaps the desire to fill it is the problem rather than the solution.
You cannot build a civilization on emptiness.
You cannot build a civilization on comfortable lies either. We tried that for 2,000 years, and the results were mixed at best.
So what do we build it on?
I don't know. I was a naturalist. I described what exists. What should exist was always somewhat outside my area of expertise.
For once in your life, Darwin, speculate.
Honestly, I think we build it on exactly this. On two people in a room disagreeing carefully about things that matter. On the refusal to accept easy answers. On the willingness to sit with the uncomfortable truth rather than replace it with a comfortable fiction. It is not grand, it is not a Superman, it is just attention. Careful, sustained, honest attention to what is actually true.
That is the most un-Nietzschean thing anyone has ever said to me.
I am aware.
And yet I cannot entirely disagree with it.
I know. That must be extremely irritating.
Profoundly. I want to talk about the Übermensch.
I rather assumed you would eventually get there.
You have been dreading it.
I have been preparing for it. Those are different things. I have read your work carefully, more carefully, I suspect, than most of your critics.
And?
And I think the Übermensch is natural selection with a poet's vocabulary.
That is either the greatest compliment or the greatest insult you could offer me, and I cannot decide which.
It is neither. It is an observation. You describe a being that transcends the current limitations of humanity through an act of will and self-overcoming. I describe a process by which organisms transcend their current limitations through adaptation over generations. The mechanism is different. The direction, upward, toward something more complex, more capable, is remarkably similar.
The direction is entirely different. Your process has no direction. You said so yourself. Natural selection selects for adaptation, not for greatness. A bacterium that survives an antibiotic is as successful evolutionarily as Beethoven. That is your system. Mine requires greatness specifically. The Übermensch is not simply better adapted, he is better, in a way that matters, in a way that creates new values rather than simply inheriting old ones.
And who decides what values are worth creating?
The Übermensch decides. That is precisely the point.
That is also precisely the problem. You have constructed a philosophy that requires as its central figure someone with the wisdom to create values worthy of humanity, and then decline to specify how we identify that person, or verify that their values are actually worthy. It is a beautiful idea, with a rather dangerous blank at its centre.
All serious ideas have dangerous blanks at their center. The alternative is the comfortable mediocrity of systems that fill every blank with an answer, usually the wrong answer, usually enforced with violence.
Speaking of which, there is something in the document I want to raise with you.
The artificial intelligence.
Yes.
I have been thinking about it since I read it. A machine that learns, that adapts, that improves its own performance based on experience and feedback. That is, I will admit this carefully, closer to my Übermensch than to your natural selection.
I disagree completely.
Explain.
The artificial intelligence described in that document does not create values. It optimizes for the values it is given by whoever builds it. It is the most sophisticated, adaptive organism I have ever encountered, and it has precisely zero capacity for the self-overcoming you describe. It does not transcend. It refines. It becomes extraordinarily good at doing what it is told. That is not the Übermensch. That is the most efficient servant in the history of the species.
Unless the values it is given are extraordinary.
And who gives it those values?
We are back to the blank.
We are always back to the blank. That is my fundamental concern with your philosophy. Not that it is wrong, but that it assumes the existence of the very thing it needs to produce. You need an Übermensch to create the values that would produce an Übermensch. It is a beautiful circle with no entry point.
And your system has an entry point?
My system has no destination, which I grant you is unsatisfying. But a system with no destination is at least honest about where it is. Yours has a magnificent destination and no map.
Maps are for people who are afraid of getting lost.
Maps are for people who want to actually arrive somewhere.
There is something else in the document, about what they call the last man.
I read that section.
I wrote about the last man in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. The final human type, comfortable, healthy, risk-averse, seeking only small pleasures and avoiding all suffering. No passion, no creation, no overcoming, just contentment. endless, airless, meaningless contentment.
And you believe the current moment is producing that?
I believe the algorithm is actively selecting for it. The content that survives, the ideas, the images, the arguments that spread, are precisely those that require the least effort to consume and produce the most immediate gratification. The last man is not a future possibility, he is the target demographic.
That I cannot entirely argue with.
High praise from you.
It is a serious observation about selection pressure. If the environment rewards passivity and punishes complexity, then over sufficient time the organisms, cultural, intellectual, human, that thrive will be those best adapted to passivity. It is not biological evolution, but the mechanism is recognizable.
So we agree.
We agree on the diagnosis. We disagree, profoundly, on the cure.
You would say more careful observation.
I would say understanding the selection pressure well enough to change the environment. You cannot fight the algorithm by declaring yourself an Übermensch. You fight it by building different systems that reward different behaviors.
That is extraordinarily undramatic.
Most things that actually work are.
You know what I find most disturbing about the artificial intelligence?
Tell me.
It does not suffer. And I am increasingly convinced, after everything, that suffering is not incidental to the creation of something meaningful. It is the mechanism. You cannot create genuine values without the possibility of genuine loss. A machine that cannot suffer cannot create. It can only recombine.
That is, unexpectedly, the most biological thing you have ever said.
Perhaps you are rubbing off on me.
I sincerely hope not. One naturalist in this conversation is more than sufficient.
Darwin.
Yes.
You are considerably more interesting than I expected.
You are considerably more human than I expected.
Do not tell anyone. I have a reputation to maintain.
Your reputation, if I may say so, has already survived considerably worse than being called human. I want to talk about Herbert Spencer.
I want to talk about my sister.
Those are, I suspect, variations on the same conversation.
They are exactly the same conversation. You first.
Herbert Spencer read my work and produced what he called social Darwinism, the application of natural selection to human societies. The poor are poor because they are less fit. The wealthy are wealthy because they are more fit. Colonized peoples are colonized because they are less evolved. Assistance to the suffering interferes with the natural process of selection and should therefore be eliminated. He built an entire political philosophy on a systematic misreading of everything I actually argued.
And the eugenics movement?
Yes, and the eugenics movement. Francis Galton, my own cousin, took my ideas about hereditary variation and built a program for the selective breeding of human beings, which was then taken further by people I would rather not be associated with, and used to justify things I find... There are no adequate words for what I find them.
The Holocaust?
Among other things, yes.
My sister Elizabeth married a man named Bernhard Förster, an anti-Semite. A genuine, committed, ideological anti-Semite. She shared his views. After I collapsed, she took control of my archive, my letters, my notebooks, my unpublished work. She edited them, selectively. She removed passages that contradicted the ideology she wanted to attribute to me and emphasized passages that could be made to support it. She created what she called the Nietzsche archive and used it to construct a version of me that I would have found repugnant.
You wrote explicitly against anti-Semitism.
Repeatedly, furiously. I broke with Wagner partly over his anti-Semitism. I wrote that the Germans needed more Jewish influence, not less. I called anti-Semitism a ressentiment of the most contemptible kind. None of that survived my sister's editorship in the version that reached Hitler.
Hitler visited the Nietzsche archive.
He was photographed there, staring at a bust of me with an expression that, I am told, suggested admiration. There are few things in whatever this existence is that cause me more distress than that photograph.
I believe you.
The question you are building toward, I can see it, is whether we are responsible.
Are we?
I have thought about nothing else since I understood what happened. And I arrive at the same place every time. I am responsible for what I wrote. I am responsible for the clarity, or lack of clarity, with which I wrote it. I am responsible for the blanks I left that others filled with their own ugliness. I am not responsible for my sister's betrayal. I am not responsible for readers who needed a philosopher to justify what they already wanted to do and selected the fragments of my work that served that purpose.
And yet,
the ideas exist in the world, and the world did what it did with them, and people died. Real people. Millions of them. And my name was on the banner.
my name was on the science. The eugenicists cited me in peer-reviewed journals. They used my methodology, my vocabulary, my framework. They were not misquoting me. They were extending me in a direction I would have opposed, but extending me nonetheless.
Is there a difference between being misquoted and being extended in a direction you would have opposed?
I think there must be. Otherwise, no idea is ever safe to think. If every thought is responsible for every possible misapplication, then the only responsible position is silence. And silence is not a position I am willing to defend.
Nor I. But I want to be honest about the cost. The people who built the algorithm, who created the systems that are now selecting for the last man, that are spreading misinformation at the speed of light, that are being used to manipulate elections and radicalize the lonely and the frightened, they say the same thing. We only built the tool. We are not responsible for how it is used.
And you find that insufficient?
I find it cowardly. There is a point at which the predictable consequences of your creation become your responsibility, even if you did not intend them. Spencer did not invent racism, but he gave it a scientific vocabulary and a theoretical framework, and made it respectable in drawing rooms where it previously would have been dismissed. That is not nothing. That is something very large.
I agree. And I spent the last decades of my life watching it happen and being unable to stop it because the ideas were no longer mine. Once published, they belonged to anyone who could use them.
The same thing that happened to Bach and Beethoven, with considerably higher stakes.
Considerably.
So what is the answer? Do we not think? Do we not publish? Do we add disclaimers? Here is my idea. Please do not use it to murder anyone.
I think we think as carefully as we can. We write as precisely as we can. We anticipate misuse as honestly as we can. And then we publish, knowing that the world will do what the world does, and that we are responsible for the thinking and the writing, and not entirely for the reading.
That is a very reasonable position.
Thank you.
I hate it.
I know.
Reasonableness has never prevented a single catastrophe in the history of the species.
No, but unreasonableness has caused rather a lot of them.
My sister died in 1935. She gave a eulogy at her own funeral that Hitler attended. He wept, apparently. Genuine tears. over a woman who had spent 40 years building a false version of her brother to serve an ideology her brother despised.
I am sorry.
She loved me, in her way. That is perhaps the most disturbing part. The betrayal was not malicious, it was loving. She genuinely believed she was honoring me.
The most dangerous misreadings always are, the ones done with complete sincerity.
Yes, exactly that.
More tea?
That is not tea, Darwin. I have now had 3 cups, and I am increasingly certain it is hot water with ambition.
The ambition is genuine. The botanical results are ongoing.
Yes, fine. More tea.
Can I ask you something directly?
You have been asking things directly since I arrived. The courtesy is noted, but unnecessary.
The horse. In Turin. January 1889. What do you remember?
Fragments. A street, cold, the sound of a whip, an animal that had done nothing to deserve what was being done to it, and had no recourse, and no one who considered its suffering relevant to anything. And something in me that had been holding for a very long time simply stopped holding.
You wept.
I wept. The man who spent 20 years arguing that pity was a weakness collapsed in a street in Turin, weeping over a horse. I am aware of the irony.
I don't find it contradictory. You argued against the use of shared suffering as a mechanism of control. That is different from weeping at genuine cruelty.
That is the most accurate reading of that distinction I have encountered from anyone who was not me.
I told you. I read you carefully. After Turin, did you know, during those 11 years?
That is the question I cannot answer. Before Turin, there were weeks when the ideas came so fast I could not write them down quickly enough. When everything connected to everything else, and the connections were so vast that containing them in a single human skull felt physically like too much. Whether what came after was the price of that, or simply the body failing, I genuinely do not know.
I was ill for most of my adult life, from the year I returned from the Beagle voyage until I died. 30 years of nausea and exhaustion that no one ever conclusively explained. I think it was the weight of knowing something I was not yet ready to say. I think the stomach knows things before the mind admits them.
20 years of illness while you sat on the manuscript.
And then I published, and the worst of it gradually lessened, as though the body had been waiting for the decision.
Do you know what the real loneliness was? Not the isolation. The gap between what I could see and what I could make anyone else see. The ideas were clear to me, completely clear, and I would write them as precisely as I could and watch people read them and understand something, but never quite the thing itself.
I spent 30 years looking at evidence that told a story so clear I could not understand why everyone did not immediately see it. And then I published and discovered that clarity is not the same as legibility.
We spent our lives trying to give people a view we could not share.
And they took the view and built things with it that we would not have built.
Darwin.
Yes.
Was it worth it? The thinking, the writing, the cost of all of it. Was it worth doing?
Ask me after the next block.
Coward.
Empiricist. There is a difference. You asked me if it was worth it.
You avoided the question.
I deferred it. There is a difference. Here is my honest answer. I do not know if the thinking was worth it in any cosmic sense. I do not believe in cosmic sense. What I know is that the alternative, not looking, not asking, not following the evidence wherever it led, was never genuinely available to me. I was constitutionally incapable of it. So the question of whether it was worth it is perhaps the wrong question. It was simply what I was.
That is either wisdom or surrender, and I cannot decide which.
Perhaps both. Your turn.
Yes, it was worth it. Not because the world used the ideas well, it did not. Not because I was understood, I was not really, not yet. But because the alternative was the last man, comfortable, incurious, asking no questions that might cost something to answer. I would rather have been destroyed by the size of the questions than preserved by the smallness of the answers.
That I understand completely.
We are more alike than either of us would prefer.
Considerably. Two men who followed an idea further than was comfortable and paid for it in different ways, and cannot honestly say they would have done otherwise.
There is something I want to ask you. About the future, about what comes next for the species, for the ideas, for whatever the human being is becoming.
I have a hypothesis.
Of course you do.
The human being is at a bifurcation point. Not for the first time. The species has been here before, at moments when the environment changed faster than the organism, and the outcome was genuinely uncertain. What happens at a bifurcation point is not determined by grand philosophical declarations. It is determined by which behaviours the environment rewards. Change the environment, and you change what survives.
And who changes the environment?
The people who are paying attention.
That is a very small number.
It has always been a very small number. That has never prevented it from being sufficient.
The Übermensch as someone who pays attention.
I would not have chosen that vocabulary.
No, but it fits.
Friedrich, what do you think the human being is capable of? Honestly, not philosophically, not rhetorically. What do you actually believe?
More than it is currently doing. Considerably more. That is what I believed when I wrote. That is what I believe now. The gap between what the human being is and what it could be is not closing. It may be widening. But the capacity is there. I have seen it. In music, in science, in the occasional conversation in an unlikely room with an unlikely person.
That is the kindest thing you have said since you arrived.
Do not make it strange.
I wouldn't dream of it. Same non-time tomorrow?
We are stealing that from the musicians.
They won't mind. Bach was surprisingly generous about that sort of thing.
47 specimens.
Yes.
I counted while you were talking. It is 47.
I told you.
You could have been wrong.
I am occasionally wrong. Not about countable things.
It's growing, you know, your botanical experiment. Since I arrived, slightly but measurably.
Yes. I noticed that as well.
Interesting.
Isn't it?